Hi guys, I'm Calder from Calder Ceramics, and if you're watching this video on the day that it is uploaded, my birthday will be in 4 days. I will be turning 19 on March 8th, and because I will be eating a cake on my birthday, I thought let's make a cake stand so that I can take a cute Insta picture with it. And I thought, since I've been making so many videos over the last couple of months, why not make a video about this as well, since you might be interested. And since you're here, I do think you are. So without any further ado, let's head over to the wheel and start off with throwing the cake stand. I put a little bit of water on the bed and then I smashed the clay on top of it, and I first press the clay downwards onto the bed so that it gets stuck. And then I start centering it. As you can see, I'm using quite a big bed because the piece is also going to be quite big, and because of that I'm also using a big piece of clay. This might be a little bit more difficult to center than smaller pieces that you may be used to, but just keep coning it up and pressing it down until the piece is fully centered. I do this in the same way as with centering smaller pieces, but because it's such a big piece of clay, I sometimes press the clay upwards a few times before pressing it down to get some more height, and then I'm able to fully center it. After it has been centered, I press the clay downwards. You have to put quite a lot of pressure on it. I'm just using my fist and I'm supporting my right hand with my left hand. You have to make the clay quite wide because the piece itself will be quite wide. I'm actually throwing the cake stand upside down, so the part that's attached to the wheel is actually going to be the top of the cake stand, and on top of that your cake will be standing, so you want to make it wider than the cakes that you're going to eat are going to be. And as you can see, I leave a little bit more clay on the middle than I do on the outside, so I leave the clay thicker on the middle. This is because I'm going to make a big foot underneath the cake stand, and I like to make this quite high. You can of course make this as high as you like. And then I start opening up the piece. I do this by holding a sponge in my hand and I press it downwards and then I pull the clay outwards. It can be a little bit difficult to see how thick your bottom is, so what I like to do with pieces that are this big is take my needle tool and I press this into the bottom, then I hold my finger on top of the clay and then I take the needle tool out of the clay, and then I can see how deep it was actually in, so I pressed all the way down to the bed, and that way I can see how thick the bottom is. And then I just go over it an extra time to close the hole. And of course, if the bottom was too thick, you can just go over it a few more times to get rid of a bit more clay and make the bottom a bit thinner. Then I pressed the clay a bit further outwards and I saw it was a little bit out of center, so I held my hands around it and just pressed on top of the clay to get it back into the middle. And then I pressed the clay on the outside thinner, so I'm actually splitting the clay into two parts. One part will be the foot on the middle and the other part will be like the little plate or bowl that's around it. You have to decide yourself how much clay you want to use for which part, but I use most of the clay for this middle part because this will be much higher. So this will actually be the foot that the whole piece will be standing on, and I start pulling up the walls. I hold a sponge in my right hand and I hold my left hand on the inside, and I press with the sponge toward my left hand while making an upwards movement. And I repeat this multiple times to make the walls thinner and make them higher. Unfortunately, the rim of my piece wasn't fully centered anymore, so I fixed this by taking my needle tool and cut off a little bit of clay on the top, and then I went over it with my fingers to smooth it out. And then I pulled the clay upwards a few more times, and as you can see, I like to hold the thumb of my left hand onto my right hand. That way I can move both of my hands easily at the same time. And then I hold my hands around the clay and slowly move them towards each other. This way the foot becomes a little bit thinner and I actually gave it a bit of a different shape. So as you can see, the middle part of the foot is a bit smaller and the top part is a bit wider. This is just a form that I like, but you can of course make it in any form you'd like. And at the top I again cut away a little bit of clay because it was a bit uneven. You have to make sure that the top is centered because otherwise your whole cake stand will be wobbly, which is not great. And then I started to work on the rim on the outside. So I first pressed the clay a little bit more towards the bed to get all of the clay on one side that I'm going to pull up. It was a little bit uncentered, so I again held my hands around it. Unfortunately you can't really see it because I always do this on the left side, but I just press my hands on top of the clay and try to press it a little bit more into the middle. And then I started to pull up the walls, so I did the same thing as with the middle part. I hold a sponge on the outside and hold my left hand on the inside, and then I pressed with my sponge to get a little bit more height, and I went over it 2 times to get the height that I wanted. And then I took this wooden knife to cut away some excess clay at the bottom, and I also cleaned my bed with this. And then I went over the side a few more times to make it one fluent shape, and because I wanted to make it straight I used a wooden loamer that I held next to it, and then I pressed the clay towards the loamer to make it into a nice and straight form. And then the cake stand's actually finished and ready to dry. I let it dry for a few days because it was a bigger piece, so it dried a bit slower. Normally I wait 1 day, but this piece took a little bit longer to dry. And I also just waited until the piece was dry enough that it actually came off the bed itself. Because I throw in plaster, the piece shrinks and then just pops off the bed, so I didn't have to cut it, which is great, so that the bottom is still nice and flat. And then as you can see, I started trimming it in my giving grip. There wasn't a lot of trimming that needed to be done since it was already flat and I didn't want to make it into any other shape. So I did go over the whole bottom once to just make sure that it was even and flat. And I cut a little bit more clay away from the sides. You could also have done this while throwing, but I just prefer to do this while trimming. So I just went over it a few times, and I also made this corner here at the side a bit more rounded. That's just the look that I like. You can also keep this sharp, whatever you like. And then when I'm done trimming, I go over it with a sponge to just smooth it out, and then I go over it with this tool. This might seem a bit random, but this tool just helps me to get rid of any slip that was created by the sponge, and this just helps me to smooth it out. And after doing this, I also go over it with my finger, so I actually went first over this middle part because it dries so fast since it's such a big shape. And then I also did the same with the side. The side had already dried, so I just took the sponge again, wetted it again, and then got rid of the slip, and then it was ready to dry before Bisque fire. Since I will be using this cake stand for my birthday, I thought let's glaze it in a happy way. So I decided to make a lot of dots, which will kind of give a confetti effect. And to make these dots I'm actually using a nail. It's important to use a nail with a flat top. And just like that I stamped a lot of dots onto the cake stand. I decided to use 3 colors. So I'm using red, blue and yellow, and they are underglazes. And I just covered the whole piece with the dots. I found that putting the underglaze on a little plate and then dipping the nail into it that way is the easiest way to get the right amount of underglaze onto the nail. I only applied 1 layer of every dot, but if you'd like you can go over it a few more times, then the colors might be a bit more vibrant or something. but going over it once was enough for me, and I also made dots on the foot. And then when I'm done with the dots and they are dry, I apply 2 coats of clear glaze. I'm using clear glaze from Emco. I first brush this onto the top part of the cake stand and then I dry this by using a heat gun. I like to use a towel on top of my wheel. This way I can easily put the piece upside down on top of the glazed part. The towel will prevent scratching the glaze. And then I'm glazing the bottom part. I'm not glazing the inside of the foot because you don't see this and it doesn't have to be foot safe. And then I start brushing on the second coat. It's important to let the glaze dry in between coats. And when the glaze is dry, I always first clean the bottom of the piece by twisting it on top of a wet piece of fabric. I unfortunately lost the clip in which I showed you, but I do this on the end of almost all of my videos. And then this piece is finished and ready to be fired. And here are some pictures of the final result. That was it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked it or learned something new from it. If so, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done yet. And if you're going to make this cake stand yourself and you're going to post it on Instagram, please tag me at Calder because I would love to see it. I hope to see you next week. Bye!